Welcome to the first in one of 2 or 3 installments about the basics of our government. I'm calling it Civics 101. It's not unlike you received when you were in high school or thereabouts, right? Depending upon your experience in college and your experience in life, you've no doubt had part of this formally and a whole bunch of it informally. And so I just wanted to review a few things. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the Enlightenment philosophers who are credited with these ideas and then see how the Declaration of Independence, the founding document of our country, reflects those ideas. The Declaration truly is the principal American document. It preceded any constitution, and it was the document Lincoln went back to in the Gettysburg Address precisely because the Constitution started out flawed and the Civil War was going to reset some of those flaws. The history of the men who wrote the founding documents and the women who influenced them are going to be topics for another day. Their stories and the circumstances of their involvement are not only interesting, but they shed some light on the documents themselves. Indeed, I'm looking to establish a baseline of understanding of the founders' written ideas at the birth of our country. This unity of thought was short-lived as they fell into two camps, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, when it came time to adopt the new Constitution. The angst over how the government should actualize these ideas became a series of issues beginning with the Adams administration, when the Vice President, Thomas Jefferson, actively worked to undermine the government, the one that he was a part of. Although the eras of American, or throughout the eras of American history, the struggle to either adapt or maintain the ideals of the documents or previous administrations has been a constant theme, and of course, this is no less true today. It is my hope that in reviewing the founding documents and their backgrounds, you're more able to make sense of today's cacophony of voices trying to influence the electorate, whether the purpose is to gain your support for the current administration or actions to oppose them. So, here are the 5 basic principles of Enlightenment philosophy. We'll go ahead and take some time moving forward to kind of break these down. Number 1, in a state of nature, that is to say, when people are just walking around and there's no government whatsoever, all people are free to do as they please. Number 2, government itself, the making of rules and the abiding by rules by people who are under the auspices of the government, is necessary due to strong or cunning people who take away other people's rights. Now, when we join a government, we give up some of our rights so we can gain security. Number 3, government should work to secure life, liberty, and property. Number 4, the power of government originates with the people, and those people should act for the general will. And number 5, when the government becomes oppressive or too tyrannical, the people have a right to overthrow it and to make a new government. So we're primarily going to look at 3 philosophers from the Enlightenment today, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and a Frenchman named Jean-Jacques Rousseau. They were Enlightenment philosophers in the 17th and 18th centuries. That's the 1600s and 1700s. And they used reason to justify and put limits on political authority. And their basis was, or the grounds, their basis was that government is based upon self-interest and rational consent, not emotional whims or I woke up today and I wanted to do something new, right? Rational consent. Here's some of the terms I'm going to explain while we're going through. Popular sovereignty, social contract, consent of the governed, and what the Declaration of Independence calls inalienable rights. That is to say, rights, natural rights, rights that everybody has. So let's start really briefly. I'll come back to this in a moment. What exactly is a social contract? So a social contract is an actual, that means it's written down, people signed it, you can pick it up and hold it, put it in a file box. An actual or a hypothetical compact or agreement between the people who are being ruled and the people who are doing the rulers, regardless if those rulers are autocrats, dictators, presidents, kings, or any other form of government that you can think of. This would certainly apply in a theocracy where some member or members of the church are purporting to hold the reins of government also. And a social contract, whether it's written or whether it's just kind of in the Ethernet, has rights and duties of each. Now, the place that this gets started is that in primitive times, that is to say, in times before there was anything like government, people were born in a state of nature. Everybody's just walking around, dressed or not dressed, and they're doing whatever they can do because they're strong enough, smart enough, cunning enough. They've made a short-term deal with somebody so that they get part and their partner gets part. And then by exercising natural reason, they formed society and government. And that means of forming the government was the beginning of a social contract. Oh, well, the king can do certain things, the ruler can do certain things, and the people can do certain things. So let's get started here with John Locke. John Locke thought that men were born free and equal. He didn't care, given the time that he lived in. He already was exposed to Spanish and Portuguese slavery in the English territories and colonies. He said everybody was born free and equal, and that all those people have rights. And his idea was that we give up some of those natural rights so we can live in a situation that's stable and comfortable. Just think for a moment that if you are born free and strong and you're an Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of a guy, then you have amazing rights when you can force your will on somebody else by virtue of being able to pound them into the ground. But as you age, there's going to be a natural atrophy of that, and then somebody else will be able to come and pound you to the ground. And so everybody has an interest to ensure that everybody gets the rights that we all have in nature. Now, to this end, he looked for a government that was limited. Government couldn't, according to him, government couldn't do whatever they wanted. That would essentially be the rulers keeping their power in a state of nature and everybody else, well, like Paul Simon said, I'd rather be the hammer than the nail. And this government then, this limited government, is based on the people being governed giving their consent to what the government's going to do. Now, the backside of that, or the reverse of the coin, is that if the people give their consent to the government to do certain things, if the government doesn't do those things, then John Locke said the people have a right to replace that government with another government, obviously one that will protect their rights. Now, his ideal government in John Locke's philosophy should be limited. Now, we'll get into why in just a couple of moments, so just hold that thought. The kernel of what we're talking about here is that no government, be that an individual, a group of oligarchs, or even a representative body like Congress, no government should be able to do whatever they want, whenever they want. They should be limited to ensure that all people have inalienable rights. Remember, those are the rights that people have just because they're people. Specifically, he called out three rights which he felt encapsulated everything, and that is life, liberty, and property. Now, he believed that people are born with a blank state. He called it, they were still using a lot of Latin in those days, and the Latin term is tabula rasa, or a blank slate. Who we become, according to Locke, is not predetermined, but rather it's based upon the experiences that we have. Now, he used that idea to reject the idea, that sounded funny. He, he used his philosophy that people aren't born certain ways, but rather become who they are based upon their life experiences, to reject the idea that God would choose anybody as a king. Because if you were going to be a good king, you learn to be a good king by the experiences that happened to you that resulted in you becoming the king. On the other hand, if you were a bad king being defined as forming a government that did not protect inalienable rights, then in the same way, you learn to be a bad king by how you reacted to experiences that happened in your life. And so John Locke's idea was, no, God didn't choose somebody and make them all good. Heaven knows he could point to the English kings and show there were plenty of English kings who were not good. So he rejected the idea straight out. You learn to be a ruler based upon how you respond to the experiences that you have. Now, he went a step further because he realized, looking at English history, he went a step further and said that the absolute best form of government separates the powers between who makes the laws and who carries the laws out. So as you can see on my little sheet here on my slide, um, legislation, the people who make the laws, you have to stop at a stop sign, and execution, if you don't stop at a stop sign, you have to pay $25. The person who makes sure that you pay the fine is different than the person who created the law and made the fine in the first place. Now, the reason that he did that is because he considered that if one person or people in the government, if they controlled both legislation and making sure that the legislation was carried out, they would act in their own self-interest all the time, without regard for the efficacy of the law in the first place, without regard for the opponents. In fact, if if a government holds the right, if a person like a king holds the right to write the law and enforce the law, then he can write laws that go after his opposition and carry them out so that there is no opposite side of whatever is happening in society. Now, he wrote an essay called Concerning Human Understanding, and in this essay, he wrote about natural rights and limited government. He boiled all the rights down to what everyone has in a state of nature before the government exists. And as I said, his idea was life, liberty, and property. Now, Jefferson, who was the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, changed um, property to the term pursuit of happiness. I'm going to come back to the pursuit of happiness thing in just a couple of moments here. When I was a school teacher, I used to explain to the students that pursuit of happiness was just a fancy way to say property. But I've recently been reading something by the CEO of the Constitution, the National Constitution Center, and he's got some different ideas. I'll come back to that. So what is a social contract? I went over that a moment ago. It's an actual or hypothetical compact between the rules, the people who are being ruled, and the rulers. Now, in primitive time, people were born in the state of nature, but in this book that he wrote concerning human understanding, Locke laid out that what happens in this social contract is that there's an agreement between the people who are being ruled and the people who are doing the ruling. Now, the second guy that we're going to look at here is Thomas Hobbes. Now, unlike John Locke, who felt that man was basically good, but government was needed to make sure that everybody got rights, Thomas Hobbes believed that man was basically bad. Now, if you follow any of the Judeo-Christian philosophy or ethic, you would translate basically bad to the sinful nature of man. And his idea was that the purpose of government was to protect us from each other, because we're so selfish that we will do things to other people. And he felt that the best government was a government that was strong, so that the government could, as it were, put its hand on the other side of the scale to make sure that the most strong, the smartest, the most cunning, the richest, whatever category you want to put on it, that they didn't get their way all the time. Because once again, he believed that if you can get your way all the time, you will take advantage of other people. Now, in his idea, the alternative to government was to live in a state of nature. And that's how he came up with this idea. And once again, basically following the Judeo-Christian thought that men are sinful, that people will abuse other people to get their own way. Now, he felt that government is formed to protect those rights of people. Now, today, we are going to go back and look at those rights that John Locke laid out: life, liberty, and property. What's more, he felt that government should be based on popular sovereignty. Now, this idea, this term is perhaps a little bit confusing. The term sovereignty means the ability to do and carry out what you wish to do. And as it relates to governments, Thomas Hobbes' idea was that the people as a group would confer their sovereignty, their ability to do what the government should do upon a specific government. And specifically, he felt that for that to happen, that people out of a state of nature would willingly give up some of their liberty so they could gain protection. Let me give you a really quick example. I'm riding down the street on my motorcycle, and I come up to a four-way stop, and there's a stop sign. Now, I have in a state of nature and in life, I have two choices. I can blow right through the stop sign, or I can give up my right to keep going fast because I'm put out by the stop sign, or I don't want to touch the gear shift mechanism, or whatever my excuse might be. I can stop at the stop sign. Everybody else stops at the stop sign also. And when there's more than one person there, then there's some rules, controlled behavior about who goes first. Now, as a consequence of that, nobody gets hurt. If I blow through the stop sign because I don't want to stop, because I don't want to change gears, and I'm enjoying going fast on my motorcycle, and the person on the perpendicular side of the stop sign does the same thing, then there's a high potential that they're going to hit me. And quite frankly, if I'm on my motorcycle, it really doesn't matter if I hit them or they hit me, I'm going to lose. So what I do is I'm willing to give up my liberty to blow through the stop sign so that I don't die when me and a car meet by accident. It's very much an idea that we want to ensure our own self-preservation. Now, the third guy that we want to take a look at is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He believed that man was born free. So you see how these three philosophers go in the same category. In a state of nature, you can do whatever you want to do. Rousseau said that while he's born free, everywhere in his life, he was in chains. That is to say, he was restrained. And his idea was the reason that we are restrained or in chains is because we put constraints upon ourselves. Now, he believed his idea was that people should surrender some of their rights for the good of everybody. If you read stuff from this time period, even through the federal period of the American government, you've heard the term, no doubt, the general weal. They usually spell it WEAL. It's for the general weal, and the idea is not unlike we can go back to my example with the stop sign. Uh, People should surrender their rights for the general good of everybody. Well, what happens if the general good isn't involved? Well, people shouldn't give up any rights for that, because if you give up additional rights that's not for the general good, then that's how we get in change in the first place. So Thomas Jefferson, who was the principal writer of the Declaration of Independence, it's kind of funny, um, not funny, ha ha, funny, strange. Uh, the Congress worked like any big committee. Um, Somebody, it happened to be Richard Henry Lee from the state of Virginia, stood up on Congress and he said, we should declare our independence and become our own country. And everybody agreed. And they said, well, that sounds pretty good. We should have a document so that the British know what's going on. And, maybe we can get some help from the French or whoever else we can talk into that. So let's write something up. And so the Congress, which had various representatives from 13 different states, different colonies, said, well, this is too big and too wieldy. We'll never be able to write a document. Let's start a committee. Now, if you have worked in any kind of job where committees are the way to do things, you understand exactly what's going to happen next. The committee's going to argue and bicker and nothing's ever going to get done. And so the committee formed a subcommittee. And the subcommittee's job, there's fewer people on that committee. The subcommittee's job is to give the committee a working document, which they can kind of bat around. And then the committee's going to take it to the body as a whole, and the body as a whole is going to bat it around. And then eventually, hopefully, they're going to come up with something that they kind of like. So that's the situation here. They formed a subcommittee. The subcommittee was too big still. The subcommittee then, from the committee to write the Declaration, the subcommittee was John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. Now, if you've seen the musical 1776, there's a great little deal about Thomas Jefferson and hadn't seen his wife for a while, and I highly recommend not only that scene but the whole movie. Either way, there's a really clever agreement. Even though Benjamin Franklin is one of the reasons he's famous, and the reason he's rich is because of his publishing company in Philadelphia, amongst which are his newspaper and Poor Richard's Almanac, which comes out on an annual basis. But Thomas Jefferson's got the gift of the pen, and that is not only true for the Declaration, but it's true in a variety of things, and he really does. And so Thomas Jefferson's the guy who writes it. He writes it up. He brings it back to the subcommittee. They bat it around. They bring it to the committee. They bat it around. And then it comes to Congress. And once again, I couldn't recommend the musical 1776 highly enough. Part of that debate in a musical format is presented in the musical 1776. One of the most contentious issues is about slavery, then and now. I know you say now doesn't sound right because slavery is gone, but the consequences of calling one group of people subhuman because of their ethnic origin is not gone. It's still very much alive and well. Anyway, so there's a really good scene. The song is called Molasses to Rum to Slaves. It's a very emotional song, and once again, I can't recommend it highly enough. Now, so the uh, the 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 Enlightenment philosophers' natural rights idea are written by Jefferson in this paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident, which means obvious, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed, that means given, to their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. that to secure these rights, governments are instituted or started and carried out among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. You can see how in that one short paragraph, he encapsulated the most important parts of those three people. Now, there's a new book by the CEO of the National Constitution Center called The Pursuit of Happiness. Its author, Jeffrey Rosen, explains that those words, pursuit of happiness, are not merely a synonym for property. Instead, in about 250 pages, he argues that the pursuit of happiness was a method used by the founders. And he goes through the book and he walks through, after he presents his thesis, he walks through how Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and John Adams and George Washington, how various members of the founders actually tried to carry out this method of pursuing happiness, using some ideas. And so the pursuit of happiness is a term for how to improve upon yourself and make yourself a better person, a better human being. Using some ideas from the ancient Greek Stoics and filtered through the Bible, they sought to examine themselves and consciously become better people. Using this idea, the idea of becoming a better person in the pursuit of happiness, the Declaration calls for government to establish a society where it's possible to not only question how to become a better person, but to have the freedom to make those changes. So you can see, I hope you can see, that pursuit of happiness is not merely a substitute for property, but rather it's a vast expansion of property that allows you not only to secure your own financial well-being and perhaps those of your children, but it also allows you on a moral basis to pursue the opportunity to become a better person, a person who doesn't cheat and lie and steal, a person who doesn't take advantage of other people. Now, these ideas are directly from John Locke. Jefferson, who once again was the principal writer of the document, he didn't really plagiarize. Plagiarizing is when you take the words of one person and you use them and call them your own. You can see here that he used the ideas of more than one person and he kind of put them together in the same place. Now, he goes on, the Declaration goes on, and he says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's the right of people to alter or abolish that government and to institute a new one. How would you do that? You see how he kind of hangs that question out? That they should institute a new government. And that government should lay its foundation on the principles and organizing powers so they'll most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Once again, plagiarism is where you take one person's idea and you copy it and you call it your own. You can start to see here how he's taken, there's a couple other people, but he's taken these three and he's put them all together, right? So why do people form a government? They form a government, they give up some rights so they can get safety. And so that's exactly what he says here. As to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Remember, pursuit of happiness means you're actively trying to make yourself a better moral person. That's where he's coming from. Prudence, indeed, he says, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. What does that mean? He's going to go on and explain this. If the government's been around for a long time, you don't just wake up on Monday and throw it out, right? A transient, think about a person who doesn't stay in one place, he moves from space to space, right? Well, causes can be like that too. And accordingly, experience, he uses some nice words here, all experience hath shown, history has shown that men are more likely disposed to suffer. That is to say, we are more likely to put up with it, as long as what the it is, while evils are sufferable. So we'll put up with some garbage because we're for the most part, things are working out and maybe we're opposed to this thing or that thing. I would bet that you, like me, can look back to every president that has served in your lifetime and pick some things out they did that you liked and some things that they did that you didn't like. The same thing's true every 2 years. There's a new Congress, and the same thing's true about the various Congresses. We could certainly bring it down to the city hall and the county and the state government, where we are more disposed to put along with the stuff we don't like, as long as things are kind of going along pretty well. So they're more likely to do that than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. We kind of know how things go, and there's a little bump in the road, but it'll be all right because we know how things go. And when the new Congress comes, we'll try to change that. So he goes on, he says, but when there's a long train of abuses and usurpations, which means when it's not just a little thing, but over and over and over, we're getting the wrong end of the stick. That not only do we feel like we're being abused, but they're purposefully they're targeting us, a usurpation. And that those abuses pursue the same object. There's only one nerve and they keep banging on it, right? If a government comes about that's only for the rich people, and everything the government does is to make you and I subservient to the rich people, then that would be pursuing invariably the same object. If the government all of a sudden decided that women should have no rights, and everything they did pursued putting women in a secondary or subservient position, that would be another example of pursuing the same object. So he goes on and he says that when there's a long train and they're pursuing the same object, and it evinces or shows a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, when we lose our voice, when we have no rights, and we're the nail all the time, he says then it is the people's right, and it's not only their right, it's their duty to throw off the government, that is to say, to eliminate it, to revolt against it, and to provide new guards for their future security. I just love his poetry here. So what's he saying? If the government becomes despotic in that everything is against the people and only in favor of the rulers, then the people who gave their consent, it's not only their right, but it's their duty to eliminate that government and to set up a brand new government that does those things, that provides security, and that indeed provides for our ability to pursue happiness. Now, he goes on, he says, such has been the suffering of these colonies. And he goes on and says, and that's how come, because it's been reduced to absolute despotism, because everything that's happened has pursued the same object to keep the government in power and take away our rights, that it is now necessary for us to alter our former forms of government. And now he'll go a step further. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations. You see how he uses that word from the top of the page again. He called it abuses the first time. He calls it injuries the second time. He's just saying the same thing. All these things the king has done has had the direct object for the establishment of some absolute tyranny over these states. Now, his term tyranny, and we'll dig into this just a little bit more. His term tyranny means that when the government, or a person in the government, the king, the dictator, the oligarchy, if there's a group of them, that when the government does everything for themselves and takes the rights away from the people, takes the voice away from the people, so that the people don't give their consent, but rather the government is thrust upon them, that is the definition of tyranny. And so he says to prove this, to prove that the king is a tyrant and that he has been doing things that have resulted in a long train of abuses or injuries and usurpations, he says, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. So guess what he's going to do? He's going to give us a list. So this section is a list of grievances against the government of England. Now, some of them are aimed directly at King George III. The members of Congress who will spend the days arguing about the Declaration. New part of the list, though, was directed toward Parliament. Remember, the English government is a combination of a representative body. In the United States we call it Congress, in Britain it's called the Parliament, and the leader, which is the king. As we read through the list, ask yourself, is this a good definition of a tyrant? Do you think the list is comprehensive? As Americans, remember Thomas Jefferson has now said it's our duty to throw off the government if it becomes tyrannical. As Americans, are we duty bound to form a new government if we can check all these off? Now, of course, this list is political. This is a political document. Remember, the public was divided into three camps, basically. Now, there's been quite a bit written about this, and these camps roughly are a third, a third, and a third. A third of them are loyalists. They're loyal to the king and Parliament, and they don't understand what all this thing's about. A third of them, Sam Adams, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, a third of them are rebels, and then about a third of them are in the middle. To those third, this is not a long train of abuses and usurpations. It's, yeah, well, sometimes things happen, but overall it's good. This document, of course, was written by the rebels. It didn't speak for at least one of the other two groups. It certainly didn't speak for the loyalists. No doubt it spoke for some of the neutrals. Some of the neutrals probably didn't care, and some of them probably leaned toward the rebel side. In this day, the loyalists would be the conservatives, the rebels would be the progressives or the liberals, and the neutrals would be the independents, if you wanted to keep score based upon today's political environment. So here's his list. Number one, he's refused to assent his laws to the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. That is to say, he didn't check in and make sure that they were good for the people that were being ruled. Number two, he's forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation until his assent shall be obtained. That is to say, that the local governors, which were appointed by the king, did the king's will. And if the people in the colonies who felt that the government only existed on their consent, the governor couldn't stop it or put it on hold. In the newspaper, you read about the court putting a stay. He's saying there's no way to put a stay on this until it's checked out to see if the king really meant what's going on. Next, he's refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation. Now, there's some other issues here about what representation would mean. Consider this for a moment. If the Parliament allowed one representative from all the colonies to go to Parliament, and that representative voted against Parliament and in favor of what was going on in the colonies every time, would they have representation? Yes, they would. Would it be effective to carry out their desire to not pay a tax on tea, to not have to pay the stamp tax so that every piece of paper had to have a tax on it? Would it do that? Of course it wouldn't. Because one vote is a voice crying in the wilderness that has no effect. So he's calling this out. He says, you refuse to pass laws which would accommodate us for these things. Why should we have to pay taxes when we use a piece of paper just because you say so? And we shouldn't have to give up our rights in order to do that. What's more, he says that right to give up our representation in the legislature, because they indeed did not get representation, that's one of his arguments here. Although I suspect if you put a poll to the people in the Congress and you ask them, if we sent 13 members over to the Parliament and called that representation, would that be okay? They would do the arithmetic and they would figure out that they would simply get voted down, and they would probably say no. But you see what he says there. This is a thing that tyrants do. He says he's called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant. He's talking about Parliament. We have to get on a boat and go over there to have a voice. And that they're a long ways away, and those public records, and that the purpose of that party of Parliament is to make compliance with what the king wants to do automatic, because we can't go give our voice about it. So he's talking about representation, and Parliament. Now the colonists had a proposal along the way between the end of the French and Indian War, or what on the continent was called the 7 Years' War, which was the consequence. The consequence of that were the taxes that the colonists didn't like. Just as a real short overview, the War of 1763, the 7 Years' War, which was yet again a war between the French and the English, was very expensive. It spilled over from the colony side to North America, and in North America it's called the French and Indian War, because the British fought the French, and the indigenous people who saw what was going on with the English joined with the French. Well, it was really expensive, and Parliament and the king said, we saved your bacon here, so the Indians didn't come back and take all your territory. And so the cost for that, there's a real cost. The Treasury is in arrears. We need to pay off our debts. And so the cost for that is a couple of taxes. Well, back to Thomas Jefferson and his friends, they proposed that instead of a representative body being Parliament, that each of the colonists would have a local representative. Like in Virginia, it was called the House of Burgesses. Each of the colonies had their own little colonial legislature. And what they proposed was to let the things that happened in the colony be completely handled by the representative houses within that colony. And so he says he has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing his invasions to the rights of the people. And what that means is that every time the colonists voted in their local assembly to not pay a tax, Parliament imposed the tax anyway. And that's what he's talking about. He refused for a long time, after the dissolutions of those bodies, to cause others to be elected. All right, so we'll just get a new House of Burgesses, a new local legislature. But when that happened, he says they were given no importance. He's endeavored, the next point, to prevent the population of these states for the purpose of obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners. Everything has to go through Parliament and the king, so that people from other parts of the Caribbean and etc. Couldn't become part of the colonies. He's obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. That is to say, the colonies wanted to have their own judges, which of course would mostly find in favor of what the colonists wanted to do, as opposed to what the king and the Parliament wanted to do. Now, of course, there were a couple of issues here. The whole idea of inalienable rights, that everybody has rights, collided with what the South called their peculiar institution. I addressed this a little bit when I looked at the cause of the Civil War. If you were here for that talk, you'll remember the cause of the Civil War was slavery. I came at it from 3 different points. Number 1, the value of the slaves as a commodity, the net worth of people who held slaves, the basis of their economic strength was the value of an individual times however many individuals they owned. Number 2, the value of tobacco and sugar as part of the gross domestic product. And number 3, even people in the New England and the North who didn't hold slaves the shipping um, to bring the slaves from Africa to the New World, the Caribbean and the colonies, and then to move the goods the slaves produced from the colonies to Britain, and then to turn around and sell those finished products back to the colonies and to trade to pick up new slaves. Everybody in the colonies derived income from the slave trade. It was either direct or it was indirect. Indirect being defined as, hey, my boat didn't carry any people, but if your boat carried the products that slavery was responsible for creating, then you were still involved in an indirect aspect. Just to kind of wrap this up, if you remember my talk on the causes of the Civil War, I went ahead and took this value, the monetary value, as late as the early 20th century, the value of cotton exceeded the value of the rest of the economy in the United States. And that power came to the southern states in two ways. Number one, it allowed them to control tariffs, trade, and other things inside the country. And number two, because of the 3/5 compromise, every 5 slaves was counted as 3 people, but there was no obligation to give them their freedom. That gave the South extra political clout. And in fact, every compromise that was made in the 19th century, as the country grew, every compromise was instituted. The Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, every compromise, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, was designed to make sure the South maintained their political supremacy. You might want to go back to that and take a look at that. So, uh, I just wanted to kind of take that little crazy Ivan for a moment and look at the all men are created equal thing. So now let's kind of run through some of these other things. These are the things, once again, that he's calling out as things that make a tyrant. He made judges dependent on his will alone. So the judge better do what the king says, both for their tenure, how long they stayed in office, and how much they got paid for it. He created new offices specifically to harass people in the colonies and make sure they did what the king wanted. He kept standing armies without the consent of the legislature. You might remember that after the Boston Tea Party, the parliament made local people keep a room for soldiers. He also made them feed the soldiers, and you can imagine if you're a rebel, the whole idea of keeping a soldier in your house is bad to you. He's affected to render the military independent and superior to the civil power. That's part of this long thread in American government, that the military doesn't answer to the king or the president. The military answers to the people. And so his argument here is that instead of the military doing what the people in the colonies wants, the military has to do what the king wants. He's combined with others to subject us to jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. So once again, he's talking about us not being able to help decide what happens, but Parliament, that's what he says means by pretended legislation. And then he comes back to quartering large bodies of armed troops amongst us. He protects them by a mock trial, so the army gets to do whatever they want to do. He's cut off trade in the mercantile system. The colonists are not allowed to trade directly with France or with what would become Italy. They're not allowed to directly trade with Caribbean islands. They have to send everything to Britain. Britain manufactures it, adds a little bit of money, and sends it back. And that's what he's talking about. For imposing taxes on us, he's talking about the Stamp Act, the Tea Act. For depriving us of the benefits of trial by jury, and for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses. And of course, he's talking about treason. He goes on and says that he abolished the free system of English laws in the neighboring provinces. He's taken away the charters. that abolished the laws. He suspended our own legislature, coming back around that. He's abdicated government by declaring us and waging war against us. So you see how he's done all this stuff. And of course, when this document is written, there's already an armed conflict going on. He's plundered our seas. He's burned our towns. He's got large armies and foreign mercenaries. The Hessians are German mercenaries who are hired by the English king to fight against the Americans in the Revolutionary War. He's constrained our fellow citizens and taken them captive. This comes out again in the War of 1812. British captains felt it was their right to impress American sailors. They felt it was their right to just pull up to an American ship, search it, and anybody who couldn't prove they were American or who the captain thought was English, they would take off the American ship and press them or make them serve on an English ship. He's excited domestic insurrections amongst us. This is interesting because, of course, the British go and do two things. They make alliances with some of the Indian nations to fight against the colonists in the Revolutionary War. And number two, they promise freedom to the slaves who will join the English cause against the rebel cause. And so that's what he's talking about here. Now he goes on and he says, in every stage of these oppressions, in this whole list, he says, we've petitioned, we've sent to you and to Parliament for correction, for the redress. We've told you that we have these problems and we've tried to work it out in the most humble terms. But he says, but our repeated petitions have been answered only by you making it worse, by repeated injury. A prince, in this case a king, whose character is marked by every act that can only be defined as a tyrant. And a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So this is his argument in a nutshell. If the ruler, the king, doesn't respect the rights of the people, and he only does the things he wants to do, he is a tyrant. And the people have not only the opportunity, but they have the responsibility to throw off the bounds, the shackles, the government of the tyrant and set up a new government. And what should that government do? It should secure the liberty and safety and happiness of the people who are willing to give their consent. Now, this is some more language that just says that we've done this over and over. We've reminded them that we came here and we're English people still. And so he kind of goes through this. He uses a lot of fancy language, but basically he's saying, listen, we tried to work with you, but you won't work with us. And so down about the fourth line up, it says, they too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. It means they didn't pay attention to us. He says, we must therefore acquiesce, agree in the necessity which pronounces our separation, and we will be enemies. We'll be enemies in war, but in peace we can be friends. That is to say, you could give us independence right now and everything will be good. But if not, we have to fight. And then he goes on and he says that we, therefore, the representatives of the United States, notice the U is small, the S is big. We're going to come back to this the next time. The states, there are 13 independent states, and they are united in a confederation. There's not one country, but rather 13 countries, and I'll get into that next time. And so he says, we, appealing to the supreme judge or God, we do in name by the authority of the people of the colonies, the consent of the governed, we publish and declare that these united colonies are of right and ought to be, all of us, we are independent states. And we are absolved or we've broken our allegiance to the British Crown, and we're going to be free and independent states. And as free and independent states, we have the power to levy war, to conduct peace, to contract alliances. That's a little under the table thing, which means we're going to talk to the French to see if they'll fight against you. To establish commerce, which means we want free and open borders so we can trade with anybody. And to do anything else that independent states might do. And to support this, we will pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And indeed, many did. So one of the strange things is, of course, you can't revolt if you don't have a government. So the Declaration of Independence, while it's celebrated on July the 4th, the 13 colonies had to come up with some way to be united. Uh, Escape was a common theme, so they got together on the basis of a military defensive agreement. The nature of that original agreement is emphasized in the Declaration in the words United States. It wasn't rocket science to figure out why or why not. So there's the Declaration. That government, of course, is under the document, the Articles of Confederation. So that's going to wrap us up. And next time when I see you, we're going to take a look then at the problems of the Articles of Confederation. Some of the problems were baked in. There were one or two things that worked out. But then the rest of the problems only became evident over time. Just to kind of give you a little hint of where I'm going here, Congress itself, the federal government, was funded by asking the states to pay the federal government. And so, of course, if you're Virginia and you're going to tax your people, then you're going to spend that money to run the government of Virginia. And somehow, when the month is over, there's just not going to be any left for the federal government. You can just take that again to New York, South Carolina, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, just do them all. And so the federal government has a really difficult time being funded. And that's not by mistake, that's on purpose. Having fought against a strong central government in the king, these 13 independent countries don't want another king. And so that's kind of the place that we're going. And so we'll take a look at the Constitution, the reason it was written, and we'll examine a little bit about the people who were in favor of that, called the Federalists, and the people who were against it, which are called the Anti-Federalists, not because they had one common theme, but because they were united in not wanting a strong federal government, which, as the overview, they considered to be a repeat of what they had fought the Revolutionary War to get away from. So that'll be next time. I didn't, this date, I'm doing this later on. The August the 28th date was canceled because the association put in a new projector on that day, and our next date is actually in September. You'll get the blast email for it. I believe it's September the 18th. Let me double check that right here. It is correct. It's September the 18th. And that's what we'll do. We'll look at the Constitution and the Federalists. So that's all for this month. Hope I see you next time.